full transparency, I was prepared for you guys to be able to read my slides because I'm about to fuck your brain up for a little bit. So, my form of teaching is open your mouth, here comes the fire hose. So, just get ready for that. Try and digest what you can. It's very science heavy. I'm a scientist at heart. I spent 10 years in close proximity with artists because artistry was my weakness. Just for a point for anybody that's struggling with their artistry, whether you are a student or a doctor or whatever. Right before I was about to graduate, I was in a seminar. I was invited to come demonstrate my artistry that I'd been training for years and years, and it was horrible. Not a good experience, 0 out of 10. And it continued to fuel me to continue to develop that artistry. Science is my love language. This is how I understand reality. This is how I interpret the world and how I create meaning out of what we are doing. So one of the things that I've always done in chiropractic is continually ask why. Because I think a lot of us are taught and inspired by teachers who intuit the world and interpret the world through their intuition. And their explanations of things are often not enough for me to understand them enough to embody them. So I then go into stuff that has a little bit more material form, which is science. And if you think that science doesn't explain chiropractic, you're dead fucking wrong. There is so much science that already exists that explains the necessity of what we do and the importance of the chiropractic adjustment. It just hasn't been synthesized and translated in a way that matters. So that is what I'm hoping to do with this talk. Again, I was hoping that you guys would be able to read what I'm saying. So I'm going to be doing a lot of reading from the screen. Mind me. But I think the information that I've captured here is important enough for you guys to get it how I have written it and not how I just deliver it off the cuff, because this is also my first time sharing this information. This was dancing around in my head for well over a year as different constructs and thoughts and ideas that I was independently studying, and I was working on weaving them together in my head, which is why the presentation is called The Web. And I basically challenged myself or put a deadline on it because I told Katie that I would come talk, and I said this is what I would talk about. So then I had to fucking do it. And then I got a disc herniation and couldn't sit, so it was really fun putting this together. The other thing that I think is funny to mention is historically not having things set up how I imagined it would have wrecked me. And now I'm just like, listen, we're just going to deliver it, and how it's meant to land is meant to land. My wife kept telling me, because my presentation would have been white background, black words. The information is what matters. I don't care if it's sexy. I do agree with what Phil said, where your office needs to be a presentation. That's why I have my wife do all that stuff, because I am there for the information. So I made it sexy. Now you can't see it, which is fucking hilarious. So look at this. Dylan convinced me to buy an oversized shirt. So here's my shirt that doesn't fit.
Is he shredded? Is he yoked? We have no idea. I'm so curious.
You know, nobody knows. All right, so why this conversation matters right now. Our world is becoming increasingly stressful, toxic, and non-biological. We are the only organism on this planet that has selectively removed ourselves from the environment that we were born in and changed every aspect of how we regulate our health. Because health regulation is both an internal and an external job. Our nervous system's job is to perceive reality internally and externally and adapt accordingly, correct? Okay, and when it can't do that, when it can't adapt, what happens? We get subluxated, okay? It's a protective strategy. That protective strategy is only beneficial if it is short-lived, okay? So even compensational strategy does have an end range to where it is no longer going to be adaptive to the organism, it is going to be destructive. Okay, so as leaders in natural health, healing, and adaptability, it is our job to understand the impacts and adapt to the needs of humanity. As destructive forces increase on a system, constructive forces must be added or destructive forces reduced to have the same capacity for healing. Adaptation and survival. The biggest missing variable in this entire equation is time. Okay, nobody's talking about time, and I'm going to tell you why it matters. If we perceive and communicate chiropractic subluxation as a moment in time rather than something that exists across time, we miss one of the most crucial conversations in chiropractic, and that is the subluxation. The devastating effects of the subluxation compound over time. They do not stay static. So the longer somebody is subluxated, the more of their bodily system is going to orient around that subluxation pattern and go deeper into a hole that they have to climb out of, a debt, if you will. Okay? So our body is still a cost-based organism. There is an exchange of energy that happens, and if you are not repaying debts faster than you are accumulating them, you will start to decline and decay and break down. Chiropractic is the expression of vitality, correct? Would you say vitality is synonymous or opposite of decay? It would be opposite, right? So we need to recognize that the destructive power of subluxation magnifies over time. And I'm going to teach you how that happens, how I think it happens. Subluxation is time-dependent in its destructive force and affects multiple body systems with compounding consequences. Neurological, biomechanical, and biotensegrity, polyvagal systems, allostatic, mitochondrial, and circadian cortisol, insulin, melatonin regulation and rhythm. Time, compensation, and allostatic load are missing variables. I'm going to go over all this. Look at my fun fucking leaders thing. Oh, okay. So this is the web, a systems biology approach to the temporal effects of chiropractic subluxation. This is how I think. This is how I talk all the time. Sorry, it sounds like a computer. I'm starting to just own it because for a long time people would tell me I sounded like a robot and it made me feel really insecure, and now I just don't fucking care. Because I hang out with Dylan too much, I guess. So, section 1, why vertebral subluxation must be understood over time. To fully understand vertebral subluxation and its true implications on human health, we have to move beyond a snapshot-based view of the body. Many current clinical frameworks, whether biomechanical, neurological, or biochemicals, that's how a lot of practices are oriented in that their superstructure are trying to help people, are still oriented around isolated moments in time. A joint restricted today, a nerve irritated right now, a symptom expressed at this visit. The moment-focused perspective is sufficient for acute presentation, but it consistently falls short when we attempt to explain long-term patterns. Chronic degeneration, progressive loss of adaptability are the differences in why one patient responds rapidly while another plateaus, despite technically appropriate care. These patterns are not nearly momentary events, they are time-dependent processes that ripple through the body in multiple systems. And unless we account for that, we miss the underlying mechanisms driving long-term health trajectories and ultimately continue to fall short on educating the public on the importance of regular, ongoing chiropractic care. So Phil also made another important point. Having somebody come in for 6 visits doesn't do anything for their health. It doesn't do anything for chiropractic. Chiropractic is supposed to be something that somebody does over the course of their lifetime routinely. Okay, it has the same fundamental principles as everything in biology, that repetition over time creates change. That repetition can be constructive, it can be destructive. Okay, so if you sit around all day and you smoke cigarettes and you're dehydrated, your tissues are going to dehydrate, they're going to compress, the cigarettes are going to change, they're going to create tissue fibrosis in your lungs, your connective tissue is going to dehydrate, it's going to bunch up, you're going to become more stiff and less mobile. Conversely, if you breathe fresh air, if you drink clean water, if you move your body often, if you get adjusted, your body is going to have more constructive forces coming in and your body is going to adapt to the frequency of that input. Can we all agree on that? Okay. That's why chiropractic is important over time. Time is not a background variable in physiology. It is an active force. Biology unfolds, accumulates, and adapts and recalibrates across time. Vertebral subluxation, when viewed through the lens, is not a static lesion. It is a dynamic process that evolves as the body continuously responds to altered motion, altered sensory input, and altered energetic demand. If subluxation were merely a local mechanical fault, its effects would be short-lived. You correct the joint, restore motion, the system would reset. Clinically, we know that sometimes this is exactly what happens, especially in early or low-load cases, which I'm going to return to that. But we also know that in many individuals, particularly those with long-standing patterns, correction alone does not fully resolve the issue. Something else has accumulated. Something else has changed. Okay? So one of the things that I was talking with Dr. Gina about earlier is there is this interesting phenomenon that happens with especially babies where they're a subluxation or even just a disruption in their natural rhythms, their nap times, their feeding schedule, just the things that are vitally important for them have a massive effect on their physiology and on their nervous system regulation. Can we all agree on that? Anybody with kids ever skip nap time? It fucks them, right? Anybody with kids ever skip snack time? Little demons are running around, okay? So I have 2 kids, so I can say that. It has a significant effect on the way that their nervous system is interpreting reality internally and therefore around them, okay? So they have a low ability for resisting that stress, but their response to adjustments is often really, really quick, correct? because they have a high adaptability. They don't have this massive load, what we're going to learn later is called allostatic load, on their system, holding it down in this compensational pattern. So when in babies, you have this really interesting dynamic where they cannot resist stressors coming in very well, but they respond really quickly. In an older person, which again, I cannot stress the importance of recognizing the people that are coming in and seeing them beyond what you see of chiropractic. These people have lifetimes of chronic subluxation patterns, poor movement habits, metabolic dysfunction, sleep disruption. The world around them is designed to destroy them and not build them. Can we all agree on that? Okay, so those layers compound through their system and ultimately affect how their nervous system can heal, how much their body is willing to invest in change, and what kind of adaptive potential they actually have. Okay, so what has changed is not simply tissue condition. What has changed is the cost structure of the organism. From the moment vertebral motion becomes compromised, whether through restriction, asymmetry, poor timing, or altered coupling, this is just neuromuscular physiology, the body adapts. Muscle increases tone to reduce uncertainty. Adjacent segments alter their movements to compensate, and global posture reorganizes. These changes are not errors. They're intelligent responses designed to preserve function and protect the organism in the face of altered input. The nervous system will always lean towards safety and predictability over exploration, especially when there is a challenge.
Can you say that muscle tone to certainty?
Muscles increase tone to reduce uncertainty. Adjacent segments alter their movement to compensate, and global posture reorganize. We're going to get deep on all of these. Early on, these adaptations are inexpensive. The body absorbs the cost easily. Recovery mechanisms such as sleep, parasympathetic activity, tissue remodeling are sufficient to restore balance. The individual may be asymptomatic or symptoms may be transient, but from a snapshot perspective, nothing appears wrong. But biology keeps accounting. Okay, so this is the subluxated person. Typically, they're either healthy or they're young, so they have a lot of adaptive potential. They feel asymptomatic, which is oftentimes a really challenging sticky point for our profession educating the public. Asymptomatic, we know, does not equal vital. We know that doesn't mean not subluxated. And biology keeps the score. It keeps accounting through time. So this is explaining to people why that is not a factor. Okay? Every adaptive response has an energetic and regulatory cost. Increased muscle tone requires energy. Reduced movement variability concentrates load. Heightened neural vigilance increases metabolic demand. Over time, these costs accumulate, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly and persistently. This accumulation is what we describe as allostatic load, which is the physiological price paid for maintaining function under non-ideal conditions. How many people, for those of you that take care of people, have heard somebody say, I don't know what happened, I was fine, and then all of a sudden, do you have a good explanation for that?
Talk about allostatic.
Yeah. Your body is designed to function optimally all the time. It is a chiropractic principle. Innate always works at 100% against the conditions of the tissue that it is flowing through. Okay? You can be the most tapped, dialed, adjusted person, and if your body is a fucking circus, it will not be able to adapt and function ideally. Period. And time is the variable that compounds and magnifies this, and it digs deeper into your systems. That's why it's a systems biology approach. It digs deeper into the systems that allow for regulation, healing, and adaptability, and it starts to compress them and collapse them into preservation and stability, and not adaptivity and vitality. People need to understand that the longer you stay subluxated, or the longer you have been subluxated, the more you need to do to get out of it to get back to vitality. It is not symptom suppression, it is a return to vitality. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Okay? People need to understand that the destructive consequences of their choices and of their lifestyles accumulate over time. There is a cost to be paid. This is where time fundamentally changes the meaning of subluxation. A vertebral subluxation that exists briefly is very different than one that persists across years. Not because the joint itself worsens, but because the system surrounding it reorganizes to accommodate it. The system around it will continuously reorganize to accommodate the subluxation pattern against all of the challenges of their life. Okay? Recovery becomes less complete. What was once a relatively minor insufficiency becomes a background drain on adaptability. Importantly, this does not require pain. Many patients with long-standing subluxation patterns function at a high level for decades. but they do so by spending more energy to achieve the same output. Their margin for error narrows, their capacity to adapt to new stressors, injury, illness, aging, and emotional stress declines. Understanding vertebral subluxation over time also reframes the role of chiropractic. The adjustment is not merely a corrective event, it is an interruption of an adaptive strategy, an adaptive trajectory. The body is trying to compensate and adapt against the constraints that it is dealing with. That can be poor lymphatic function, that can be low blood flow, that can be reduced motion across the vertebral column that is interfering with the afferent information that's going to their brain. It can be poor digestion, it can be a lot of things, okay? Early in the process, that interruption may be sufficient to allow the system to reset. Later, when allostatic load is high, the same correction may restore motion but fail to restore adaptability unless recovery capacity is also addressed. If we do not account for time, we risk misunderstanding why care works, why it stops working, and why vitality is not synonymous with symptom relief. When we place vertebral subluxation within a temporal, systems-based framework, a more complete picture emerges. One in which mechanical dysfunction, neural adaptation, autonomic regulation, circadian recovery, and metabolic capacity are not separate conversations, but different views of the same evolving process. There's a lot of talking. We're on slide 11 of 68, so buckle in. This is the foundation for everything that follows. From here, we will begin to layer the systems, mechanical, neural, autonomic, circadian, and energetic, not as isolated topics, but as interacting components of a living web that unfolds over time. One of the most damaging misunderstandings in chronic care, and what I mean by chronic care is taking care of people that have been dysfunctional for a long time. Okay, so if you are in a practice like a lot of chiropractic practices, you're not going to have vital, vibrant people cruising through your office saying, I just think this stuff is good and I can't imagine not having it. I'm already doing great, but I want to do better. You're going to get people that are in pretty rough shape and are looking to you, looking to chiropractic, looking to a natural health solution to improve their life. What if you could show them the way? The chiropractic way. What if you could show them not just the chiropractic adjustment, but the chiropractic principles embodied as a lifestyle? Do you guys live a chiropractic lifestyle? Does that involve more than adjusting? Why don't you teach your patients? Right? Do you think that they would do better? Do you think that the care would hit harder? Do you think they'd have a better expression of their life? Okay. One of the most damaging understandings in chronic care across every profession is that the assumption that compensation is inherently pathological. We see altered posture, altered gait, reduced range of motion, increased tone, asymmetric loading, and we treat these as errors the body is making. But the body is not careless. In the vast majority of cases, what we call compensation is the organism doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect integrity, preserve function, and reduce threat in the most efficient way available at the time. Compensation is not failure, compensation is strategy. Compensation is the body prioritizing stability under constraint. So you can also, in a very shifted paradigm way, because anytime somebody goes into a medical establishment, they are getting blood markers and they are getting different tests and different scans that are showing them why their body is broken. You can show them why their body's intelligent. This is step one. I'm not here to tell you where your body's broken. I'm not here to tell you where you're wrong. I'm here to show you where your symptoms are arising out of, somebody had said it yesterday and it was beautiful. I think it was Wyld. Symptoms are the language of expression from innate. Okay, so if compensation is inherently intelligent by the body, the symptoms are the expressive language of innate intelligence to give you an understanding of what that compensation is doing. Because compensation over time does have a cost to it, because compensation is inherently not the most efficient way to go about life. It is just a really effective way to maintain function and maintain health across time, even in the face of neurological uncertainty. A subluxated joint creates uncertainty. That uncertainty can be mechanical, reduced motion, altered coupling, or reduced load sharing. It can be sensory, degraded mechanoreceptive and proprioceptive input, altered timing of afferent feedback, or mismatched information relative to the expected movement, which is called prediction error. Prediction error in the body increases bracing. That is what you are palpating. When you palpate someone's body and you are feeling the tone of their system, you are feeling their nervous system, their brain responding to, I predicted when I did this motion that this is the afferent feedback that I would get, and it came back different. That is prediction error. What I thought was going to happen and what it happened were different. The magnitude of that difference results in the magnitude of the response from the body. So a nervous system that is more geared towards safety and stability will do what with higher prediction error? It's going to maintain control. Okay? When uncertainty increases, the nervous system does not try harder to be flexible. It does the opposite. It increases stability. It reduces degrees of freedom, increases tone, and simplifies motor strategies. It limits variability. This is what intelligent systems do when predictability is compromised. Stability is prioritized over efficiency because instability has catastrophic downsides. This is the same logic that governs many biological decisions. In uncertain environments, you choose strategies that reduce risk even if they are energetically costly. Compensation can preserve functions for years, it just costs more to do so. Okay, you can see that same principle, you can see that reflected all through every biological system there is. One of the ones that I had a thought flash come to me was, when you see forests that have been subject to forest fires, the trees that survive typically don't have bark or branches on the lower part of the tree. And it's not because that they couldn't regrow those branches, it's because if they keep their photosynthetic receptors higher up in the sky, closer to the sun, and they limit the amount of damage that can happen to the rest of the tree when a fire comes through, what happens in the ground is when it's sensing a fire, because the forest talks to itself, the trunk of the tree will flood itself with water, and the upper part will typically be far enough away from the flames, and then it'll survive. It's an adaptive strategy in the face of it to minimize risk. Your body does the same shit, it just does it differently. This is why many people with significant patterns of restriction or postural distortion remain high functioning. They can work, train, parent, compete, build businesses. Their bodies are not collapsing, their bodies are executing a stability strategy. But they are paying for that stability, and it accumulates as allostatic load. If you only look at function and symptoms, you miss this completely. A person may feel fine while living in a high-cost state. In practice, we see this repeatedly. The person isn't in pain, but they're rigid. They're not injured, but they are braced. They're not sick, but they're depleted. And they're not aware of their adaptation, but the adaptation is running their physiology. Okay? This is why time matters. Compensation is often successful enough to mask dysfunction until reserve declines. And it takes a while for reserve decline if you're doing other things well. What we are currently seeing in our population is reserve is declining before people even hit adolescence. Okay, so we are in a really weird time in the timeline of things where human health is being destroyed at an earlier age, which means our allostatic load is getting higher at younger ages and our adaptive reserve is collapsing at younger ages. Okay, it used to be that younger systems were more vitalistic because they didn't have the adaptive load in them. Now we are seeing the erosion of that because of all of the craziness. This is an organizing principle that bridges biomechanics to systems biology. Compensation is adaptive until cost exceeds the organism's recovery capacity. This is where allostatic load becomes relevant. Allostasis is the body maintaining stability through change. Allostatic load is the cumulative cost of those changes. A compensation strategy increases costs through several mechanisms. Bracing of the muscles or increasing muscle tone requires an ongoing ATP demand. Reduced variability concentrates repetitive stress on parts of joints or individual joints. Increased sensory monitoring increases neurometabolic demand. Altered breathing affects autonomic and metabolic effects, and reduced restorative regulations through sleep quality and repair. The body is maintaining stability but spending more resources to do so per unit of time. So this is what's happening underneath all of the philosophy and the woo in the science world in your body when your body subluxates. Compensation often appears to start mechanically and then spread neurologically or systematically. But the truth is more complex. Systems influence each other continuously. The body is a heterarchy, not a hierarchy. There might be a couple people that get up and leave after I say this. I have long felt that we overemphasize the fact that the nervous system is the end-all, be-all, top command of the body because the nervous system cannot function well and adapt if the other systems are not supporting it.
You guys were saying this in this room this morning when I was saying that too.
Sweet.
I just have to agree with you. So
Sweet.
I leave it.
If you... I I would love to take the most healthy, vital person in this room and restrict your blood flow by 30%. And we'll see how well your nervous system keeps the fuck up. I would love to take the most healthy, vital person in this room and blast your lymphatic system with a bunch of metabolic stressors. I'd love to take the most healthy, vital person in this room and reduce your mitochondrial function by 50% and see how well your nervous system does. Your neurons have mitochondria in them. They need them to work, okay? I don't want us to get so lost in some of the dogma that does exist in our profession that we forget the other important components that contribute to the ultimate goal of chiropractic, which is vitality. Vitality is expressed through the nervous system. The nervous system still needs help. Otherwise, you would just be a nervous system and not a body. Okay? Mechanical instability biases neural strategy. Neural strategy changes muscle tone. Muscle tone changes respiration. Respiration changes autonomic state. Autonomic state changes sleep and circadian timing. Circadian timing changes tissue remodeling and energetic capacity. Energetic capacity changes the ability to repattern movement, repair tissues, and limits adaptive capacity. That's the spiral through the system. Okay? This is not linear causality, it's a web of heterarchical compensation. Over time, the pattern becomes self-reinforcing. Once compensation is integrated deeply into the system over time, you can no longer treat it purely as a local mechanical issue. Correcting the joint and reducing nervous system interference remains essential, but the rest of the system has adapted around the pattern, and those adaptations must be recognized. In early stages, compensations are flexible and reversible. The nervous system uses them when needed, and releases them when conditions approve. Such as with the adjustment. In later stages, compensations become baseline. They become identity. The body then integrates them into the neuroplastic system, and it has a hard time getting out. My favorite analogy of this is when you go skiing. If you find a line with fresh powder and you go down it and you make that track, every time you go down that track, it becomes easier and easier to stay in the track and harder to get out, right? That's how neuroplasticity works. Your brain works on efficiency and predictability. So the longer you do the same thing, the more efficient you are at doing it, the harder it is to change. Your whole body is governed on this law. Okay? In early stages, compensations are flexible and reversible. The nervous system uses them when needed and releases them when conditions approve, such as with the adjustment. In later stages, compensations become baseline. They become identity. The system forgets how to exit the strategy or no longer has the capacity to. This is the pivot from adaptation to disease. The body has been paying a cost long enough that it can no longer afford to return to flexibility. Nearly every manifestation of dis-ease and disease that can arise from subluxation does not occur because the body did not compensate. It occurs because the body compensated so effectively for so long that recovery could not keep up. Okay? The body is intelligent, but it needs more constructive forces than destructive forces going through it to heal. The spine is not a passive column of stacked joints. It is a dynamically regulated structure whose primary job is not motion for its own sake, but force transmission under constantly changing conditions. Every step, every breath, every shift of posture requires the spine to distribute load, dampen shock, and transmit force efficiently between the ground, the viscera, and the head. When a vertebral segment becomes subluxated, the problem is rarely that the joint doesn't move. More often, the problem is that it doesn't move when it should, how it should, or in coordination with its neighbors. Timing, contribution, and coupling matter more than absolute range. A segment that moves late, inconsistently, or under certain loads introduces uncertainty into the system. The body responds to that uncertainty immediately by biasing towards control. The first response is increased stabilization. Muscles surrounding the affected region increase tone to limit unpredictable motion. The nervous system has learned that this region cannot be trusted to behave elastically, so it replaces elasticity with control. Adjacent segments adjust their movement to compensate, often taking on greater motion or altered loading patterns. Fascial tension redistributes to maintain the global tensegrity. At this stage, function is preserved, posture is maintained, movement continues. Pain may be absent. From the outside, the system looks successful, but internally something important has changed. The cost of doing the same work has increased. Stabilization is energetically expensive. Muscles held in sustained muscle tone consume ATP continuously. They require ongoing neural input and metabolic support, and unlike elastic tissues which store and release energy, Chronically active muscles dissipate energy as heat. This means that every movement, standing, walking, breathing, now requires more metabolic input than before. It is a drain on the person's adaptive potential. Okay? At the same time, reduced motion variability begins to concentrate mechanical stress. In a highly variable system, no single tissue bears the same load repetitively. Stress is shared across joints, muscles, and fascial planes. When variability decreases, the same tissues are loaded in the same way over and over. It is not the magnitude of force that becomes problematic, it's the repetition of that force. Think water dropping onto a stone. Okay, we've probably all gone to a monument or a thing where there's a waterfall and it has eroded the rock over time. It didn't do that because of the power of the waterfall per se, but it did it because of the repetition of that force over time. That is the same thing that happens in our body. Repetition over time creates change. That's one of the things that I teach my practice members all the time, because I want them to understand that the quality of their choices and the repetitiveness of those choices is what is going to shape their future self. I'm giving them control. Okay? In this case, repeated loading of the same tissues without the ability to repair begins the process of degenerative breakdown. Tissue models show changes to tissues within 48 hours of loss of appropriate motion. I'm not sure if you know that, but if you're subluxated for 48 hours, you're already starting to show histological changes within your joint. This is where global force transmission becomes clinically relevant. Because the body is organized as a continuous tension system, local mechanical distortion does not remain local. Changes in stiffness at one region alter tension elsewhere. A restricted thoracic segment influences cervical load, pelvic mechanics influence lumbar tone. Fascial continuity ensures that the compensation propagates across regions, allowing the body to hold the distortion pattern rather than one isolated area. Okay, so the whole body is doing it together. If you were in the talk this morning, you heard me say that the body is always trying to balance tension and compression. Okay, so what happens to an area of a system that's under chronic compression? It starts to break down. Over time, tissues adapt to this environment. Muscles hypertrophy or shorten to meet stabilization demands. Fascia becomes denser and less compliant. Joint capsules lose elasticity. These adaptations improve tolerance to repetitive stress, but they also reduce responsiveness. The system becomes better at resisting change and worse at adapting to novelty. So we're becoming less vital. Okay? The person still functions, but they do so with less mechanical slack. Their movements feel effortful, recovery after exertion takes longer, and small perturbations have larger effects. From a chiropractic perspective, this is the earliest point at which intervention has outsized leverage. Restoring motion here does more than improve joint mechanics, it reduces global cost. When motion variability increases, load redistributes, muscles can relax, elastic tissues resume their role in force management, and the energetic demand of simply being upright decreases. However, the longer mechanical distortion persists, the more the system reorganizes around it. What began as a local stabilization strategy becomes embedded in global posture, movement habits, and tissue properties. At that point, correcting motion remains necessary, but it is no longer sufficient on its own. The system has learned a new mechanical normal, and that normal carries forward into sensory processing and motor control. So this is the longer you ski down a path, the deeper it gets, the harder it is to get out. Your brain and your somatosensory cortex and your somatomotor cortex build different neural pathways for how you're going to execute things in your life. This is the critical transition. Mechanical distortion does not change force, it changes how force is expected, managed, and paid for. Once that expectation shifts, the problem is no longer confined to structure, it has become a question of strategy. This is where the web tightens further, because altered mechanics inevitably alter sensory information, and altered sensory information changes how the nervous system chooses to move, organize, and respond to environmental stimuli. We doing okay? Yeah. I hate being the guy reading the PowerPoint, but I can't memorize all this. I just want you to think differently about what you're doing. I don't really care if this is like a beautiful presentation. It's fine. The spine is not merely a mechanical conduit, it is one of the body's most significant sensory organs. Deep paraspinal muscles, joint capsules, ligaments, and surrounding connective tissues are densely populated with mechanoreceptors that continuously inform the nervous system about position, movement, load, and timing. The sensory input is foundational. It is used to build internal models of posture, movement that allow the body to effectively and predictively that allow the body to act efficiently and predictively rather than reactively. When vertebral motion is altered, the sensory landscape changes with it. It becomes less consistent, less predictable, and less well matched to motor expectation, which is that prediction error I mentioned earlier. A segment that moves late, stiffly, or asymmetrically sends a different pattern of afferent information than one that moves fluidly and in coordination with its neighbors. Over time, this altered input becomes the background noise that the nervous system must work with. The nervous system's response to unreliable sensory information is not to increase flexibility, it's to increase control. When prediction becomes difficult, the system defaults to strategies that reduce uncertainty. This is a fundamental principle of motor control. Movements become slower, stiffer, and more guarded. Degrees of freedom are reduced and co-contraction increases. The system sacrifices efficiency to gain predictability. This is where many clinical misunderstandings arise. Bracing, rigidity, and reduced movement variability are often expressed as weakness, poor motor control, or maladaptive habits. In reality, they are precise responses to altered sensory input. The nervous system is doing exactly what it should do when it no longer trusts the information it is receiving. This is where I get really bent out of shape about DOs and PTs and whoever the fuck wants to take the adjustment and try and make it part of them. I don't think that physical therapy is an unnecessary modality. I think it is a very important thing to be along with the chiropractic adjustment. You cannot replace the chiropractic adjustment and what it does for the nervous system. But the chiropractic adjustment will always, always, always function better and hold better in a system that is both flexible and strong and can hold itself in a good posture. Can we all agree on that? Okay. So if you don't want to do it in your office, refer and make friends with other people that do PT work and stabilization work, but know that it is in the best interest of your patient, of your client, to be getting adjusted and to also be strengthening the system for which that adjustment is landing in. Okay? As these strategies repeat, they become learned. The nervous system wires them as the safest way to move in this body. What began as a subluxation-dependent response becomes a default motor pattern. Importantly, this learning does not require pain. It occurs simply through the repetition under constraint. The body learns that movement requires vigilance. Over time, sensory distortion affects more than the local region. Proprioceptive input from the spine plays a critical role in global coordination. When that input degrades, timing between regions shifts. Gait becomes less fluid, postural reflexes adapt, limb movements become less synchronized with trunk motion, breathing patterns adjust to accommodate increased trunk stiffness, often becoming shallower or more accessory driven. What is going to happen when your breathing becomes shallower and accessory muscle driven? Is that sympathetic or parasympathetic breathing? Sympathetic breathing. One of the things that I've talked about in 360 of the pelvis, and one of the things that relates to Gina's talk a lot, is when you see somebody that has been subluxated for a long time, their body will regress into developmental stages of motor function, where babies' arms typically go in and their feet go out, and they become really rigid in certain regions. They're not segmentally mobile anymore. They function through their regions. So their thoracic spine becomes one thing, their cervical spine becomes one thing, their lumbopelvic system becomes one thing, because they are bracing for motor control. So you will literally see somebody's ability to move and engage their body system go to earlier developmental stages. Okay? This is also where the nervous system begins to operate at a higher energetic cost. Increased motor control requires increased neural processing. Co-contraction demands continuous motor output. Heightened sensory monitoring increases cortical and subcortical activity. The system is still functioning, but is doing so less economically. Clinically, this is the stage at which patients often describe feeling tight or restricted or guarded, even if they cannot identify a specific problem. Movements feel effortful. The body feels less responsive. Recovery after activity takes longer. These experiences reflect not just tissue condition, but how the nervous system has learned to move in a response to persistent sensory distortion. Okay, so the conversation surrounding somebody has altered motor patterns and tight brace systems, is functional movement important after the adjustment? Absolutely. You're literally showing the brain the capacity of the body just gained to move through different ranges of motion safely, rather than it had blocked off that motor strategy because it did not feel stable and safe before. Chiropractic adjustments at this stage play a dual role. Mechanically, it restores motion and reduces local stiffness. Sensory-wise, it provides a novel and meaningful afferent input that can help recalibrate motor expectations. For some individuals, this is enough to disrupt the learned pattern and allow the nervous system to explore more efficient strategies. For others, especially when these patterns have been present for years and are deeply entrenched, the adjustment may improve motion but fail to immediately change motor behavior. The nervous system continues to a default protective strategies because they have been reinforced over time. This is learned safety. This is where coupling dynamic movement into care plans can have massive benefits. The combination of the chiropractic adjustment with novel and dynamic movements not only shows the nervous system that movement is safe again, but it allows new programming via the interplay of the somatosensory and the somatomotor cortices. As system distortion becomes integrated and motor strategies become more rigid, another layer of the web becomes increasingly involved: state regulation. The body is not only deciding how to move, it is deciding how alert, prepared, and defensive it needs to be to exist in this environment. This decision lives in the autonomic nervous system, and once it shifts, the consequences extend far beyond movement. So this section's called I kept forgetting to tell you the name of the sections. How autonomic bias becomes the quiet amplifier. By the time mechanical distortion, sensory alteration, and chronic bracing have consolidated, the system has already undergone a profound shift. What began as a local adaptation has now altered how the organism relates itself at a state level. This is where the autonomic nervous system enters the conversation. The autonomic nervous system is not merely a regulator of heart rate, digestion, and blood pressure. It is a context-setting system. Its primary function is to determine whether the organism is safe enough to relax, explore, and recover, or whether it must remain prepared, vigilant, and protective. This decision is made continuously, moment to moment, based on incoming information from the body and the environment. Crucially, the autonomic nervous system does not distinguish between external threat and internal unpredictability. Mechanical instability, sensory ambiguity, sustained muscle tone, and altered breathing patterns are all interpreted as signals that the body itself may not be fully safe or reliable. Over time, these signals bias autonomic output towards vigilance, even in the absence of conscious stress or emotional distress. The bias is subtle at first. Parasympathetic activity is not eliminated, it is simply less accessible. Sympathetic tone does not spike dramatically, it becomes the background hum. The system can still shift states, but it does so more slowly and less completely. Flexibility narrows. One of the earliest expressions of this shift is seen in breathing. As trunk stiffness increases and bracing becomes habitual, respiratory mechanics change. Breathing becomes shallower, more thoracic, and more accessory-driven. The diaphragm's role in postural stabilization increases, reducing its ability to move freely. This alters carbon dioxide tolerance, chemoreceptor sensitivity, and vagal afferent signaling, further reinforcing autonomic vigilance. So again, there's science for what we do. Just not talked about much. Autonomic bias increases baseline muscle tone, making bracing harder to release even when mechanical conditions improve. It reduces digestive efficiency and alters gut motility, subtly impairing nutrient absorption and immune regulation. It elevates inflammatory tone and slows resolution of microinjury. It alters cardiovascular variability, reducing the system's ability to respond dynamically to changing demands. Most importantly, autonomic bias interferes with recovery. The thermostat of the nervous system is biased towards defense rather than expression and exploration. Recovery is not simply rest. I think a lot of us have our patients like rest, and recovery is an active thing, and it's also something that your body has set programming to do. It requires a coordinated downregulation of vigilance systems and an upregulation of repair processes. When parasympathetic flexibility is reduced, the organism struggles to fully enter restorative states. Sleep may still occur, but it becomes lighter, more fragmented, and less effective at resolving accumulated cost. The individual may wake feeling unrefreshed despite adequate sleep duration. From a chiropractic standpoint, this is a critical realization. By the time autonomic bias is entrenched, vertebral subluxation is no longer just a mechanical issue or a sensory motor issue, it's a state issue. The body is organized around protection. Adjustments at this stage can still restore motion and improve sensory input, but their effects are filtered through a nervous system that is less willing to downregulate. The adjustment opens the door, but the nervous system hesitates to walk through it. This is not resistance or failure, it is state-dependent caution. The goal is not to force relaxation or suppress sympathetic tone, but to reduce the signals that require vigilance and to restore the system's confidence in its own stability. We are about uplifting people and giving them the tools and the keys to get their life back for themselves by themselves. Mechanical predictability, sensory clarity, and safe variability become prerequisites for autonomic flexibility. Here, on top of dynamic and variable movement, we add the need for breath work, meditation, and other activities that alter nervous system tone. With increased autonomic vigilance and a shift into sympathetic dominance, cortisol levels become altered, often flattening in their dineural rhythm. This opens the door for the next layer of the web to emerge, which is circadian timing and recovery capacity. Does everybody know what dineural rhythms are? There are rhythms in your body that are synced by clock genes. So you have different receptors. A lot of them are through your eye. They go through your eye to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and they're basically your brain interpreting what time of the day it is through the trajectory and the wavelengths of light of the sun, which we have fucked to death with blue light. And constant. And I know a lot of you make fun of blue light, but it's a real thing. If our brain cannot accurately perceive what time of day it is and regulate these clock genes in the way that our hormones and different recovery capacities are supposed to activate, you're not going to be in repair when you're supposed to be in repair, and you're typically going to stay in a vigilant state, which a vigilant body, a body that is more concerned with protection and maintaining alive tomorrow, is not concerned about repairing right now. Recovery is not a vague concept. It's a time-dependent biological process governed by circadian rhythms. The body does not repair tissues, recalibrate neural circuits, or restore energetic reserve continuously. These processes are gated. They occur preferentially during specific phases of the 24-hour cycle when hormonal signals, autonomic tone, immune activity, and cellular metabolism align to permit restoration. Under healthy conditions, the circadian system creates a clear daily rhythm. During waking hours, physiology is biased towards mobilization. Muscle tone is higher, sympathetic tone supports activity. Cortisol facilitates energy availability, and attention is outwardly directed. As evening approaches, the system is meant to transition. Cortisol declines, parasympathetic influence increases, melatonin rises. The organism enters a state in which repair becomes metabolically and neurologically affordable. When autonomic vigilance persists into the evening, even subtly, this transition becomes incomplete. The individual may still fall asleep, but the body does not fully downregulate. Sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented and less restorative. The hormonal signals that coordinate repair lose amplitude, and the body remains partially on call, even during rest. Chronic subluxation patterns contribute to this disruption indirectly but powerfully. Sustained muscle tone, altered breathing mechanics, and persistent sensory vigilance feed into brainstem and hypothalamic centers that regulate circadian timing. The system interprets ongoing internal uncertainty as a reason to maintain readiness. From an evolutionary perspective, this is logical. Repair is energetically expensive and temporarily destabilizing. It only occurs when the organism believes it's safe enough to invest. Over time, this mistiming accumulates consequences. Tissue repair becomes incomplete, micro-injuries resolve more slowly, neuroplasticity is reduced, inflammatory processes linger longer than they should, and mitochondrial maintenance is interrupted. Each day begins with a small deficit carried forward from the previous one. Allostatic load accumulates faster. This is where circadian disruption becomes the multiplier of breakdown. This is also why chronic cases are disproportionately sensitive to disruptions in sleep, routine, or schedule. Travel, late nights, emotional stress, or inconsistent light exposure have outside effects. The system is already operating close to its recovery limit. Small perturbations push it further into deficit. Without adequate downregulation of vigilance, the body does not fully enter the biochemical state required for repair. At this stage, vertebral subluxation has become part of a much larger loop. Mechanical distortion increased costs, sensory distortion altered strategy, bracing preserved function, autonomic bias amplified demand, and circadian disruption ensured that the cost was not repaid. This is the moment where the clinical question shifts from how do we correct structure to how do we restore the conditions under which correction can integrate. Understanding circadian disruption as a consequence of long-standing compensation rather than a separate lifestyle issue is essential. It explains why chronic patients often require more than structural correction to heal, and why addressing sleep, light exposure, breathing, and daily rhythm is not optional but foundational. Now we see how dynamic movement, autonomic balancing, metabolic recalibration, light timing, and sleep mechanics all layer into a multifactorial approach to restoring adaptation and vitality. As circadian disruption persists, another accounting process becomes unavoidable. The body begins to make decisions not just about when to repair, but about whether it can afford to repair at all. This decision is captured by the concept of allostatic load, and it fundamentally changes what the organism is willing to do next. We're about 2/3 of the way through. Are we okay? Cool. Allostasis refers to the body's ability to maintain stability through change. It is the process by which physiological systems adjust their set points to meet demand. Allostatic load, in contrast, represents the long-term cost of those adjustments. It's not a single variable or a biomarker, it's an integrated burden carried by the organism after repeated or prolonged adaptation. Blah, blah, blah. Look at this guy saying blah, 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 blah. Every compensatory strategy described so far, mechanical stabilization, sensory vigilance, bracing, autonomic bias, circadian disruption, represents a withdrawal from physiologic reserve. As long as withdrawals are matched by deposits through recovery, the system maintains balance and adaptive. When withdrawals exceed deposits, debt accumulates. Debt is the biological marker that contributes to breakdown over time.
I just want to say that I've been blown away just by one simple concept that was up here for a very long time and you just made it tangible.
Great.
Which is that the body is always tending towards adaptation, and the subluxation complex is part of that adaptation.
Yep.
And it was always a difficult question for me to answer of if it's 100% always on point and always knows exactly what to do, then why would you ever get subluxated ever? It's like, well, that's the most efficient thing for the body to be able to compensate around. Compensation is a function of efficiency.
A subluxation is a timed program by the nervous system. The subluxation is a intelligent timed program of the nervous system. The nervous system creates subluxation as a defense strategy. It does so based off of the internal and external demands based on it and whether or not it can adapt to it at that given time. We also used to be a lot more dynamic and active and healthy in alignment with the sun. So close your eyes and think about 1,000 years ago when we used to be walking around with our feet grounded into the earth, when we'd be smelling the forest, when we'd be in a parasympathetic state for a large majority of the day, when we had accurate light timing from the sun, when we spent time in community, when we moved our body flexibly, and we engaged our muscle systems. All of that, those are all natural strategies to reduce subluxation. You can be subluxated and move yourself out of subluxation naturally without a chiropractor. That's probably how your body is supposed to do it. Chiropractic was born out of a need because we became less and less biological. We are the only organism to separate ourselves almost completely from the system that birthed us out of it. So all of our timing and our cueing and our signaling for how we're supposed to not only perceive life but respond to it intelligently has been destroyed. Okay? This debt is not evenly distributed. It shows up as reduced tolerance for stress, slower recovery from exertion, heightened sensitivity to perturbation, and diminished capacity for adaptation. The organism begins to behave more conservatively because it has become more limited in its resources. Again, it's more concerned with survival than it is with being vital at this time. Repair, remodeling, and plasticity are energetically expensive. They require not only energy availability, but confidence that investing that energy will not jeopardize survival. From the body's perspective, healing is not always the highest priority. Stability often is. As allostatic load accumulates, the system begins to favor strategies that minimize further expenditure. Movement variability is suppressed because variability is costly. Tissue remodeling slows because remodeling is destabilizing. Neuroplasticity is constrained because plasticity introduces uncertainty. The organism becomes increasingly conservative in its choices, and often in its thinking. So when you have patients that come in that have a very narrow view of their life and their healing capacity and their potential, it's a organism level shift towards conservation and safety and minimalization. Chiropractic at its fundamental core is about maximalization of life. Okay? Subluxation, the longer it exists in your system over time, has a destructive consequence towards that maximalization of expression. In reality, the system is behaving exactly as it should under conditions of high allostatic load. It is protecting what little reserve remains. Increasing demand on a system that is already operating at the edge of its capacity does not restore function, it increases debt. It also explains why chronic patients often experience nonlinear responses to care. A small improvement in sleep, breathing, or daily rhythm may produce disproportionate gains. Conversely, a minor stressor may precipitate significant regression. I'm going to give you a very real-world example of this. How many people that take care of people, or even just people that know other people, which I imagine is all of you, have seen somebody go from they haven't done much as far as like their physical movement, and they jump right into one of these classes or programs and they end up with tendonitis 3 weeks later, right? They either overexert beyond their tissue's capacity to heal, adapt, and recover, or they're already missing some of the recovery systems to respond to that physical challenge, repair the tissue, strengthen it, because that's ultimately what you're trying to do, is break the tissue just enough that the body comes in and says, hey, we need to be stronger next time, and it builds. So because they have limited their adaptive capacity over time, they cannot handle that stressor. It is a good thing to be exercising, but they don't have the adaptive reserve to keep up with that, okay? The body remodels itself to reduce ongoing costs and increase stability under constrained conditions. Elasticity is traded for durability. Adaptability is traded for predictability. Understanding this shift is essential for chiropractors working with chronic cases. When allostatic load is high, the system may not be willing to integrate even beneficial inputs unless the overall cost structure is addressed. Adjustments remain valuable, but their effects are constrained by what the organism can afford to do with them. This is where the web demands a deeper layer of understanding. If allostatic load determines what the body can afford, then we must ask what governs the body's energetic capacity and willingness to invest. That question leads directly to metabolism and mitochondrial function, not as an isolated biochemical process, but as the execution layer of the entire system. I love mitochondria, they're cool as fuck. By the time allostatic load has altered what the body is willing to afford, the conversion inevitably arrives at energy. Processes such as adaptation, repair, and reorganization all require energy, and that energy is supplied by none other than the powerhouse of the cell, our friend, the mitochondria. I had little like breaks in here so we could giggle at stuff, and it just doesn't land as well when it's not on the screen. However, the role is not merely to produce ATP on demand. Mitochondria are deeply integrated into signaling networks that regulate inflammation, redox balance, apoptosis, calcium handling, and cellular resilience. They are not just generators of energy, they are regulators of whether energy is spent on maintenance, defense, or growth. In the context of long-standing subluxation and accumulated allostatic load, the mitochondria become the execution point of upstream decisions. The nervous system, autonomic state, and circadian rhythms collectively determine whether the organism is in a mode of investment or conservation. Mitochondria carry out that decision at the cellular level. When recovery capacity is intact and energetic reserve is sufficient, mitochondria support processes that are essential for healing. Tissue remodeling, neuroplasticity, immune resolution, and restoration of elasticity. These processes are energetically expensive, but they are sustainable when cost is repaid regularly. As allostatic load accumulates, mitochondrial priorities shift. Maintenance and survival take precedence over adaptation. Processes that introduce variability or require significant energy investment, such as remodeling connective tissue, updating motor programs, or resolving low-grade inflammation, are downregulated. This is because energy availability is not just about supply, it is about allocation. A system under high allostatic load allocates energy towards maintaining stability and managing threat, not towards remodeling and growth. Even beneficial interventions may be treated as additional demands rather than opportunities for repair. Mitochondrial function is also tightly coupled to circadian timing. Key processes such as mitochondrial biogenesis, which is the formulation of new mitochondria, fission and fusion, which is ultimately how they create ATP, and removal of damaged mitochondria, which is called mitophagy, occurs preferentially during periods of rest, particularly during deep sleep. When circadian disruption truncates or fragments these windows, mitochondrial quality decline. Damaged or inefficient mitochondria accumulate, increasing oxidative stress, and which biases the system more towards damage control and further reducing reserve. This creates a self-reinforcing loop. Reduced mitochondrial efficiency increases fatigue and slows recovery, which increases reliance on compensatory strategies, which further elevates allostatic load. The system becomes trapped in a low reserve state. From a chiropractic perspective, this explains why late-stage cases often respond unpredictably to care. Adjustments restore motion and improve sensory input, but the system lacks the energetic reserve to fully reorganize around the improvement. Gains are temporary, and the body reverts to familiar, low-cost strategies. Understanding mitochondrial function in this way reframes chronic care. The goal is not to force energy production, but to create conditions under which the system is willing and able to invest energy again. Mechanical predictability, sensory clarity, autonomic flexibility, and circadian alignment are not just adjuncts to mitochondrial health, they are prerequisites for it. So these are all things that can occur around care. Everybody, I imagine, gives some sort of like home recommendations or life upgrade recommendations. These are all things that are very accessible to everybody. Get better sleep, avoid certain windows of light exposure, eat better food, move your body in dynamic ways, make sure you're flexible, make sure you're strong, make sure you're adjusted. By the time the system reaches a high allostatic load state and reduced energetic reserve state, the rules of intervention change. Early in the timeline of subluxation, the body is resilient. Mechanical correction produces clear changes because the system still has reserve. Sensory input is quickly updated. Motor strategies reorganize and autonomic tone flexes. Recovery mechanisms consolidate gains overnight. In this phase, the adjustment acts as a decisive interruption and the system willingly explores in a more efficient state. In later stages, the body has learned to survive with limited resources. Stability has been prioritized over adaptability. The nervous system has narrowed its options. Mitochondrial reserve is reduced. Circadian recovery is incomplete, and the organism is no longer oriented towards growth or reorganization. It is oriented towards conservation. An adjustment that would have been interpreted earlier as an opportunity for reorganization may now be interpreted as demand. The joint may move better, but the nervous system hesitates to release protective tone. Sensory novelty is detected but not fully integrated. Motor strategies briefly soften, then they revert. The primary objective shifts from driving change to restoring conditions that make change affordable. Mechanical correction remains essential, but it must be paired with strategies that reduce baseline demand and improve recovery capacity. This may involve respecting slower pacing, which can be care planning, allowing longer integration periods, supporting downregulation rather than chasing immediate correction, and prioritizing consistency over intensity. I have recently changed how I deliver care plans because I want to optimize the length of time that I have with a person and not always the repetitiveness. So what I used to default a lot of times into 3 times a week for X amount of weeks for almost everybody that came in, there are definitely cases that require that. And on the back end, I am seeing people for once a week significantly longer because the repetition over a greater duration of time allows for a lot of their body systems that move at different paces to start to organize around this system that is now less subluxated. At this stage, the role of the chiropractor expands, not beyond chiropractic, but deeper into it. The adjustment becomes a signal of safety and predictability, not just a mechanical event. Its effectiveness depends on just as much on when and how it is delivered as on where. Pairing the massive benefits of chiropractic care with things that restore the web of influence and adaptability in the body not only increase the power of the chiropractic adjustment, but they give credit to the chiropractic principles as a lifestyle approach to longevity and vitality, which is fucking everywhere right now. This approach literally targets both the concepts of prevention by keeping allostatic low and adaptability high, and healing by reducing the cost of daily living and restoring the body's innate capacity to return to more efficient and higher function systems. Things that many of us already consider essential in our lives come to the forefront of an integrated care model. Movement variability, strength, flexibility, metabolic efficiency, autonomic flexibility, circadian timing and sleep quality, mitochondrial function and repair, they all matter and they all intersect to produce the most important concept in chiropractic, vitality. Chiropractic restores access. It reduces mechanical and sensory barriers. It lowers the cost of movement and posture. It tells the nervous system that variability may be safe again. But it does not do all of this by itself, and it does not guarantee that the system will invest in change. That decision depends on recovery capacity and energetic reserve and state regulation. This is where chiropractic opens the door for other processes to resume their function. When motion is restored and sensory input improves, autonomic flexibility becomes more attainable. Breathing can deepen, parasympathetic tone can increase, the system can downregulate more fully during rest, circadian rhythms have an opportunity to reassert themselves, mitochondrial maintenance processes can resume more efficiently, and tissue remodeling becomes more affordable. When vertebral subluxation is understood as a dynamic, time-dependent, multi-system process, the role of chiropractic care becomes both clearer and more expansive. At its core, chiropractic care restores motion with meaning. Not motion as a raw mechanical quality, but motion that is appropriately timed, coordinated, and expressed within the larger system. When a vertebral segment regains its ability to move elastically and predictably, the immediate benefit is reduction in local mechanical cost. Load redistributes, muscles no longer need to work as hard to stabilize uncertainty. Tissues regain some of their capacity to absorb and return energy. But the deeper restoration occurs at the level of information. By altering joint motion, the adjustment changes afferent input into the nervous system. It introduces novel, coherent sensory signals that tell the nervous system something important. This region may be becoming more predictable, which predictability is equal to safety. This is not a cognitive message, it is a physiological one. It is delivered directly to the spinal cord, brainstem, and higher centers that govern posture, movement, and state regulation. Chiropractic is central because it addresses one of the most powerful upstream constraints in the system, how the body moves and senses itself. By restoring predictability at that level, chiropractic reduces the need for compensatory strategies across the web. But the extent to which those strategies unwind depends on how long they have been in place and how much reserve remains in the system, which is not governed by age but by the overall quality of the system in which they exist. This understanding also reshapes clinical collaboration and patient education. Supporting sleep, breathing, daily rhythm, and stress regulation is no longer seen as an add-on or a dilution of chiropractic. It is seen as a supporting the system's ability to integrate the adjustment. The adjustment remains the foundation. These other factors determine whether the rest of the structure adapts to higher orders of complexity or stays the same. This is the true power of chiropractic within the web. Not that it does everything, but that it makes all other things more possible. And when those possibilities are realized consistently over time, the results are not merely the absence of pain or dysfunction. The result is something deeper and much more meaningful, a return to vitality. Vitality is not static. It is not a state one achieves and then maintains indefinitely. It's a dynamic property of a system that can meet challenge, respond appropriately, and return to baseline without excessive expenditure. In this sense, vitality is not about perfection, it is about resilience. A vital system bends, reorganizes, and recovers. A depleted system resists change, conserves aggressively, and breaks when pushed beyond its limits. By altering motion, sensory input, and force distribution, subluxation increases the cost of everyday life. The body compensates intelligently, but those compensations accumulate cost. Over time, that cost reshapes how the system moves, regulates itself, recovers, and invests energy. It becomes a chronic constraint on adaptability. Symptom suppression, while often necessary in acute context, does not restore vitality. It may reduce discomfort without reducing cost. It may quiet signals without changing strategy. In some cases, it may even increase allostatic load by allowing the system to persist in high-cost patterns without feedback. Relief is not the same as resilience. Vitality requires something much more fundamental, the restoration of adaptability. When recovery capacity is intact, restoring motion allows the system to reorganize naturally. When allostatic load is high, adaptability returns slowly, in stages, as cost is reduced and reserve is built. Progress may appear subtle at first. Better sleep, improved tolerance, more consistent energy, greater emotional stability, fewer setbacks. These are not secondary gains, they are signs that vitality is reemerging. How many people have taken care of people that have come in and said, man, I sleep so much better now since receiving care? How many people have taken care of people that used to get injured when they'd go to yoga or when they'd go to CrossFit or when they would go do the things that they like to do and they were constantly battling breakdown and injury? And now they are tolerating that better. How many people notice patients that have either a poor, they have a shit mood when they start care, and then you start to see this beautiful human being emerge in your practice that you didn't know when they first came in. They start talking about how they have more emotional flexibility and regulation with their kids, with their family, with their work. Educating them on that is your body gaining resilience and improving this allostatic load. Use whatever fucking words you want to, but those are not just like fun little things that they've gained as a side effect of chiropractic care. This is literally your body returning to a state of vitality. These are the first signs that this care is helping you. And I want you to take note of this, because as we increase that over time, your capacity to resist change and challenge in your life will only get better the longer that you are out of subluxation. Okay? The perspective also reframes prevention. The goal is not to chase pathology before it appears, but to maintain low cost and high adaptability over time. Regular chiropractic care, supportive daily rhythms, efficient movement, and adequate recovery are not interventions for disease, they are investments in resilience. We have an entire medical system right now that waits for people to get broken and then offers them a solution, right? What if our paradigm was the dominant paradigm? That if you allow your body to be strong, to be adaptable, to be vital, you will not have to find a way to repair it when it's broken. There might be hiccups, but there's solutions to those hiccups, right? This model that persists in the world that none of us really agree with has not come without its benefits. There is a time and a place where if I get shot in my fucking stomach, I don't want to go to the chiropractor. I'd like to go to the ER, please. Okay? There are times where if I'm struggling with cancer, if I have anemia, if something is going wrong in my body and I need help now so that I have a chance for tomorrow, I would like those strategies. But that is not a care model. That is not a life model. Okay? That is an emergency model. But we are treating it like a life model. Our model is the life model. And people need to understand that. When vertebral subluxation is understood within this web, chiropractic no longer is just a corrective technique. It is a profession concerned with the economics of human adaptation. It asks not only where the body is restricted, but how long it has been paying for that restriction and what it will take to restore adaptive capacity and resilience. That is the deeper promise of chiropractic care. Not merely to reduce pain, but to restore vitality by reducing cost, expanding adaptability, and allowing the body to do what it has always been designed to do. Respond intelligently to life and fully recover afterwards. So this whole talk, if you take one thing away, if you want to take one note, I'll repeat this as many times as you need. This is the cascade that can be summarized very simply. Loss of spinal motion degrades what's called proprioceptive fidelity, which is the clarity of the proprioceptive information in your body. So loss of spinal motion degrades proprioceptive fidelity. Degraded proprioception increases prediction error. Prediction error drives protective stiffness and autonomic vigilance. Autonomic vigilance disrupts circadian recovery. Circadian disruption strains mitochondrial capacity. Mitochondrial strain impairs repair. Impaired repair converts adaptation into degeneration. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Can you say that again?